as a parent, we're told we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do this with our kids, but you're responsible if they don't follow the rules.
I think there's just a lot of stuff that's going on with parents today that is affecting their kids in a negative way. That's just going to kind of, this cycle is going to continue.
I think the things that concern me the most about raising kids nowadays is violence. People are different nowadays. The media, internet, movie, games.
I think what concerns me is kids are growing up too fast. And that, again, might be because parents are working more.
In clothing and messaging and retailing and going towards things, everybody is kind of growing up a little faster.
What concerns me in raising children today, in today's society, is the fact that the crime that they have to face, we have to face, the crime, the drugs.
Children and parents are really afraid in this, our culture today. They're afraid to let their children go outside. They're afraid of kidnapping and all sorts of things.
The government butting in. Yeah, every move you make, they want to be involved, and they want to tell you how to raise your kids.
The 40-hour work week, is can be grueling at times, and honestly, it's not really much of a 40-hour work week anymore. It's more like a 60 or 70-hour work week for most parents. Living the American dream doesn't lend itself well to raising kids.
Hi, I'm George Barna. I want to welcome you here to my home. Right now we're here in the kitchen, which is where a lot of our conversations take place with our daughters. A lot of important family conversations and activity takes place here and in the family room and the eating room behind me. We're going to be spending a lot of time together over the next few weeks talking through what kind of conversations should we be having, what kind of activities should we be engaging in. I started the Barna Group back in 1984, and since that time we've conducted a lot of research. We've interviewed more than 500,000 people across the country, all kinds of people, all kinds of projects, a diverse array of clients that we've worked for, ranging from the Army and the Navy to nonprofits such as World Vision and the Billy Graham Association, working with major corporations such as Visa and Prudential, as well as mega churches, small churches, all kinds of different ministries, even political campaigns for people running for office at all different levels. And yet, over the course of the years, with all the research we've done, I have to tell you that one of the most difficult projects we've ever done was this one related to revolutionary parenting. What does it take to raise kids to become spiritual champions? People who love God with all their heart, mind, strength, and soul. People who want to make God their priority in life. People who look at things through a lens of, what would God have me do in this situation? It's not easy to raise those kinds of kids. And so what we did was we thought, well, why don't we start with a group of young adults who seem to fit that profile? So we found a national sample, a representative sample of young people in their 20s who were these kind of spiritual champions. And we interviewed them about the kind of upbringing they had had. We talked with them about some of their beliefs and behaviors, their lifestyle, what their parents had done, what they felt about how they were raised. And then at the end of the interview, we asked them if we could interview their parents as well. And for those parents who were living, we were able to do that. And at the end of it, I put it all together, looked at what the kids said, what the parents said. We tried to find the commonalities across all these different families and households to determine what are the things that seem to be in place every time you wind up having a spiritual champion emerge. And so that's what we want to talk about over the course of the next 8 weeks. We're going to talk about some of the facts related to what happens. It's not going to be a big emotional time. I want to just lay out for you, here's what we found from talking with all these kids and all these parents. And then you and I can come to grips with that. There are no magic steps. This isn't something you're going to master in a weekend. It's not a series of activities that you can do in a month and you're done. This is a lifelong commitment. And I want to warn you too that over the course of all of this, you're going to hear some things that are going to make you uncomfortable. And my admonition to you is, you know what, you don't have to like this. You just have to deal with it. And I'll tell you as well that this is not about how I have parented my kids. Frankly, this is probably the most difficult study personally I've ever had to do. Because as we went through and discovered what revolutionary parenting was about, I realized I wasn't one of them. I realized there were a lot of things that I really had to learn and to incorporate into how I was raising my daughters. And it's been tough. I haven't mastered it to this day. And so it's going to be tough. Over the course of years, I've written 42 books. I've got 3 college degrees. I've started 5 companies. I've planted and pastored 2 churches. I've spoken in more than 1,000 events around the country. I've been in the inner circle advising people in presidential campaigns, congressional campaigns, gubernatorial campaigns. And in spite of all that, those were some tough times, but there has never been anything as tough that I personally have struggled with as raising my kids. And so I don't want you thinking, he's telling us how to do it because he's done it. I've struggled with this too. You probably will as well. And so my goal really with this whole process and you going through this workbook is that if you hear nothing else, you take this away. It's going to take tremendous commitment on your part, and it's going to take a plan. One of the great lessons I learned from this whole exercise is that great kids don't emerge by accident. You've really got to invest yourself in this process. And keep in mind that parenting is just like any other endeavor you might engage in during the course of your life. You're going to get out of it what you put into it. And even if you throw yourself into it wholeheartedly, there's no guarantee that you're going to get the outcome that you're hoping and praying for. But I will tell you this. As I studied all these revolutionary parents, I came to realize these people are no smarter than me. They're no more committed than me. They've just learned some things along the way that really help them to put it together into a package of parenting that help them to raise great kids. And so I want to be able to share that with you over the next few weeks. As you think about your life and what you want to leave behind, I think maybe the greatest opportunity you're ever going to have to affect the world is through how you raise your children. The kind of people that they grow up to be. Whether or not they live for God or they live for themselves. This is something that you can impact. And so I'm encouraging you to recognize it's not going to be easy, but it's something you can do. As you commit yourself to this, as you develop a plan based on many of the dynamics and factors that we're going to talk about, this can work well for you. Let's talk for a minute about the workbook itself. Develop this resource in the hope that it will give you some practical guidelines and steps that you could use to become a revolutionary parent, someone who's raising a true spiritual champion. And so as you go through this workbook, please think of it as something that's supposed to initiate study and reflection, and in particular conversation between you and your spouse, conversation between you and other parents, conversation between you and whoever you may have that you can talk to about these things. But the whole idea is for you really to dig in and invest yourself in this process so that you can become the ultimate parent that God intended you to be. Now, as you work through the workbook, I'd ask you also to consider reading the book Revolutionary Parenting alongside it, because that will give you a lot more depth and insight into some of the attributes and some of the concepts that are dealt with in the workbook. But know that each of the sessions that you go through each week are going to be on a different dimension of parenting, hopefully giving you things that you can start to implement right away in how you're raising your children. And so let me just tell you, there will be an introductory video segment before you jump into each of those workbook chapters. And then after you finish the chapter, come back to the DVD and there will be a kind of a review segment that you can watch as well, where I'll be giving you yet another challenge related to the things that you just learned about and talked about. So in a moment, I'd like you to turn off this DVD and start some of your reflection process, but here's what I want you to do when you begin that process. I'd like you to consider 2 questions to start off with. The first of those questions would be, why are you doing this? What's your goal that you want to achieve from having gone through this workbook and having read the book and had these dialogues and all this reflection time? What is the outcome that you want to see happen? Be as specific as possible. Just saying, I want better kids doesn't work. You really need to think through specifically what do you want to see emerge from the process. And secondly, I want you also to address the issue of what are you willing to change and not change in how you're parenting your children. Because that too will be an important ingredient in this whole mix as to how you're going to become a revolutionary parent. All right, now turn off the DVD and start to talk about that, then go through the first session, and I'll see you on the back end. Now that you've gone through the chapter, you've probably recognized, yes, we do in fact have a crisis in parenting, and you're really the only solution to that crisis. You know, in the United States, we talk about all these different kinds of issues, whether it's terrorism or the economy or globalization, immigration, whatever it may be. All of that essentially fades away in terms of relevance unless we raise kids who truly know and love and honor God. In this process, I think one of the key things that we've got to work on is the whole issue of the child's worldview. What is the lens through which they see reality? How do they make their choices in life? We want them to do so in accordance with God's principles as laid out in His Word. You know, and in developing that worldview, you and I as parents become the greatest influence they're going to have. Certainly there's going to be a lot of other influences, whether it's culture, whether it's other individuals in their life, but we still have tremendous influence, and we've got to make the most of that. As we raise our children, also keep in mind that what we're doing is we are shaping the culture at the same time. You realize, of course, that a culture is nothing more than the accumulation of the people in it. And so our contribution to the development of the national culture is our children. And keep in mind that it's not something that's a done deal. It's constantly changing and shifting. And the more determined we are to add value to that culture through how we raise our children, the better off everything is going to be. Recognize that culture is simply formed by people, and people are formed by their parents. So what you invest in this process has tremendous implications for many other lives and for many years to come. When I think about the research that we did, we discovered, of course, that this is not something that happens by accident. You have to be very intentional about this process. And so you've got to take a look at all the facts that you can get about what's working, what's not working. One of the facts that you were exposed to in the course of this chapter was the one that talked about our research among 8 to 12-year-olds, where we found that only about 1 out of every 3 of them believe that the Bible is something that they can trust and believe and work with in their life. Only 1 out of every 3. Most kids do not believe that the Bible is a necessity in order for them to be successful in life, for them to have real purpose in life, for them to go somewhere significant in life. I want you to be thinking about what kind of foundation are you building in your child's life? How does the Bible fit into it? What do they think about the Bible? How do they see its relevance to who they are? How do they use the Bible, if at all, in terms of the key choices that they make related to their personal behavior, related to their dreams for the future, related to the kind of relationships that they develop, related to their perspectives about faith and spirituality and the church and their role in all of those things? What kind of exposure do they have to the core principles in Scripture? How are they accountable for incorporating those things into their mind and their heart? And do these children, do your children, do my children, see the Bible lived out in your life and my life? Because if we talk and teach about it, but we don't live it, they have no interest in incorporating it. So we've got to think those elements through. You know, this is one of those areas where I think back over the 25 years that I've been doing research, and we've worked with so many different individuals and organizations, many of whom have been extraordinarily successful. And as I've looked at the patterns of success of these places, I've noticed that there's a pretty consistent stream of activity that facilitates that kind of success. The first step in that is in your mind, in your heart. You've got to have a vision of who you want your children to be, because vision is the starting place for all of this. When you think 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, what do you want your children to be like? In very specific terms. And then secondly, you need to analyze the situation that you're in. As you're trying to raise a spiritual champion, you need to think through, what are the indicators that I have that they are or are not a spiritual champion right now, and what it might take to get there. And then the next element has to be where you identify some goals that will then be put into a plan that ultimately you're going to execute. Goals that will have strategies attached to them of how you're going to facilitate your child becoming that kind of person. And as you execute that plan, you want to constantly be evaluating, is this working? Maybe there's a different strategy, a different tactic that I need to take in order to see this actually come to play. But you're the one in charge of that situation. You've got to be the one who's constantly on top of, am I doing the right things? Could I do it a different way? Does my child get it? Is my child incorporating it into who they are? And as you evaluate that information, you may need to change your plan a little bit. And over the course of time, that's great. That's to be expected. When you write a plan at the beginning of this process, it better not be the plan that you wind up with, or you haven't been paying attention. So it's important that you're constantly, personally, deeply invested in this process, making changes as you need to see that original vision of who you want your child to become come to pass. Toward that end, I want to leave you with a couple of questions that hopefully you'll think about and discuss. The first of those has to do with when we talk about having a plan for raising your children. What is your plan? Have you really put it together? Have you thought through not just a plan for the next 3 days, but the long-term plan? When you think about that vision, what's the long-term plan over the course of years of what you are planning to do to see that child become a spiritual champion? And as you think through that plan, it's imperative that you also look at what is God's role in the plan. If you haven't already learned it, let me tell you, you can't do this by yourself. You need God to be your partner in raising spiritual champions. We're living in a cultural environment that doesn't understand it, doesn't appreciate it, isn't going to facilitate it. And so you're in this, you're going to be in this with your family, you're going to be in this with your spiritual family, but most importantly, you got to be invested in this with God. How do you incorporate God into that process? How do you get guidance? How do you understand the application of the principles that He's given to you? All of that is critical for your plan. So I would ask you to go back and think about these things, pray about these things, talk with others about these things, because it's incredibly important as we try to see your children become spiritual champions.